Welcome everyone, this is Danny and Karl with GetWisdom, and today we're going to continue with the channeling series, and Karl today is going to channel Aldous Huxley, who is a pretty famous author and speaker and thinker, and he died in the early 60s. He wrote some pretty famous books that are still famous to this day. You will have seen a little bio about this fellow. We've got some pretty interesting questions, only 5 questions, but I think they're going to elicit long answers, which is fine. We've got the time to do it, and so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, especially Karl, for doing this with us. And maybe we can have a little discussion, and then we'll do the channeling.
All right, thank you, Danny. Welcome everybody. This person is one who I would consider an individual of note. He has been famous all the time I've been alive, but as I get older, these people more and more fade into the background. The young generation may or may not be aware of him. The thing that was most striking to me that I encountered along the way was Brave New World.
Yeah.
His dystopian novel of a dark future of humanity. And in many ways, it's prophetic. So this is, I think, a good example, very likely, of someone who was on a divine mission and was tapped because of his talents and his interests and his innate divine alignment sufficient to the cause to be part of an orchestration from the divine realm, to serve as a warning, as a kind of a heads up what might be coming, and to foreshadow some of these events that we're seeing around us now, and things getting worse and worse all the time. It's a slow creep, but it's a painful creep.
Yeah. It's not much fun watching it. That's for sure.
No. And there doesn't seem to be a let up. It used to be you had your wars and then you had your generation of peace.
Right.
And you could kind of catch your breath and lick your wounds. And if you were still alive, you could have something of a semblance of a normal life. But now it just seems like everything keeps hitting and hitting and hitting.
Yeah.
And they're turning the screws. And so these kinds of insights are really worth noting, but both to pay tribute to those who've come before wanting to help, but also to inspire the current generation. Mm-hmm. That what we're doing and what we're thinking about and maybe think is worth doing, not sure. Will there be an audience? Are people willing to listen? Is it worth the effort? And all those things. I think the message has got to be, do it. Do everything that you can to bring forth divine truth. And if it's in a fictionalized format in some way or another, so what?
Yeah.
It can be helpful.
Yeah.
A lot of the science fiction work is spot on about the doings of extraterrestrials here on the planet now and manipulating us, and the darkness and the sources of evil, the dark spirits and so on. That corruption is rampant, and it has been all through history, and we have lots and lots of fare in print and on the screen about dark doings of all kinds, but without much deep insight where it's actually coming from.
Yeah.
Albeit it's you're seeing human characters without any explanation other than some armchair psychiatry, maybe in some cases.
Yeah.
But there is a deeper story, and there's a deeper meaning to it all as well.
And that's what I especially like doing a channeling with a fellow like this, because he really wasn't exposing everything that probably needed to be exposed. But now he's in a place where he could see all that. And now it gives him an opportunity to comment with respect to his ability to see what's actually going on as it relates to what he was doing at that time. Which I think I think that's one of the reasons we get kind of like this enthusiasm and this drive to give a very thorough answer to every question we ask, because that's their one and only opportunity to kind of, close the loop, if you will, give a full explanation, put their work as a human into context of the larger picture. And so for me, it's really satisfying, and he's similar to, George Orwell in some respects, because George Orwell's kind of doing the same thing, sounding alarm, had a, different message, wasn't involved with mescaline and LSD and his inquiries like Aldous Huxley was, but they were kind of thematically similar.
Yeah, it's very much the same genre and the same kind of inspiration, I think. And there are many works like this, and we don't always appreciate it for what it is.
Right.
And as a channeler and talking to the divine about how they work through us and what humans really consist of and what their capabilities are when they're entirely on their own compared to when they're tapped in and they can get divine inspiration. Mm-hmm. It's like night and day.
Yeah.
It's the difference between pop music and other kinds of music to some extent. I don't want to malign pop music as a total broad brush dismissal, but the superficial versus things with deep meaning that have a richness, maybe a complexity, but have real substance and depth of content and meaning. That is a hallmark of the divine coming through.
Right.
The great works of art, the great works of literature, the great works of composition and music and other forms of art, sculpture and so on. The good stuff comes from above.
Yeah.
Just like we do.
Yeah, without fail.
Yeah.
There's really no exceptions to that.
We're a divine creation. And we're impulsed with a lot of wisdom along the way from our guidance. And it inspires us. And then it comes out through our handiwork, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Whether we're growing a garden and we just kind of do it in a nice way and we are good stewards of the land and it thrives and looks beautiful, that's a divine expression in its way. So the great artists all know where this stuff comes from, and they have a feeling for it. They may not be religious, but they know that there's a muse, there's something they tap into.
Yeah.
That when that gets flowing, it's like lightning coming through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was somebody who could tap that lightning bolt on occasion and really come up with some good things.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's interesting, too, because there was definitely a divine aspect in his work. Like, for instance, what you said earlier, kind of a warning of what's in our future. But also, he later in his life, he also admitted that this work was actually a blueprint for what governments were going to be doing. So he kind of informed them in a way through the Tavistock Institute primarily. I think there's probably other paths that we may or may not know about, where he he was helping our oppressors in a fashion, by explaining how they could control populations and and enjoy their servitude, enjoy their slave status in a large modern civilization. So he was kind of a mixed bag in a way. But I think in so many of these stories where we see that, we're ultimately talking about the divine realm's ability as a result of our request to turn lemons into lemonade, if you will. And this is a classic example where something like that could happen if we rise to the occasion.
Well, and you can see this aspect of his work that we've been commenting on as a kind of whistleblowing. And so he may have been tapped as a resource to serve the darkness, but that's no different than almost every other human being who really has no life of their own. They're really kind of minions of the deep state. They do what the government expects. They pay their taxes, they vote, and they contribute to a lot of corrupt institutions, and often are complacent and don't question wrongdoing or even just inefficiency, corruption, and misguided thinking that drives so much public policy. And things done by the institutions of learning and jurisprudence and medicine and all of it. There's dark sides to everything that goes on.
Right. Yeah. Any of that could be hijacked, and it often is.
Yeah. So you're working for a company, you're working for a government agency, whatever it is, you're serving dark aims to some degree because they're all corrupted.
Yeah.
And they're all being minded and constrained to be at a mediocre level or even antithetical to the benefit of humanity in some way.
Right.
Working at cross purposes.
Yeah.
Being a more of a impediment to progress than progressing. Because they got the power to do something, but they're not doing anything.
Right.
They're just talking and meeting and writing policy papers or what have you, and this kind of thing. Make work exercises, and that's just sort of classic of what happens. So when someone comes along and shakes things up, there's a divine hand in that usually, I think, because otherwise people won't do it.
Yeah.
You're going against the grain.
Yeah. And it's not, as history as dark as it is, has not been a static situation. There's still growth, and there's still there's still hope. Despite everything that's gone on, there's still hope, and the hope is not based on false thinking. There's a hope, which goes back to why you and I are doing what we're doing right now. So Aldous Huxley, we've got 5 questions for him. We're referencing back to some of the things that he said or things that he was involved in. Hopefully you will have taken some time to look at the bio at the beginning of this video. If he's not familiar to you, he's a very interesting fellow. There's still quite a bit of stuff about him available. Not all of it has been hidden. Like we see with some other people that we've channeled. Sometimes they're obscure, and they're obscure for reasons. Usually dark ones. What we know, like for instance, right now we know that Google is really changing the way they provide information to their people, and a lot of these other search engines that use Google's methodology, even if they stand apart, are limited themselves just because of the technology that's being used on the internet now for controlling information. And so over time, people like him it's logical to assume, given what we've seen to date, that they're going to become even more obscure. So it's a good time to spread your wings and look around a little bit, because what's available to us now isn't as good as it was yesterday, and that means that tomorrow it could even be worse.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the trajectory in motion at the present. It is very much one of heightening controls, limiting access to knowledge, a kind of dimming down and dumbing down, and a lot of kind of control and manipulation of thought in deciding in advance what's acceptable and what isn't. You know, the idea of political correctness being but one example of that.
Yeah.
There is a much deeper level of manipulation and control across the board on many subjects. And it's reinforced with mind control manipulation of people.
Right.
So the control access and searchability and invisibility and all that. But people are also being corrupted to not value much important knowledge and information, and to have false beliefs about many things. So society has always been shaped and changed by this manipulation.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky to come away from a look-see at history with any kind of true awareness of what happened in the past.
Yeah.
And that's not a very favorable launching point for managing our future.
Yeah, it's quite a handicap.
It is. It is. You know, everybody says, "Oh, we have to learn the lessons of history." You know, well, what if the history you're given is partial?
Yeah.
And rewritten in some respects, even.
Yeah. Just flat out wrong.
Yeah, it's shocking. You know, now there's talk about not teaching history. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It boggles the mind.
Yeah, we don't teach cursive anymore. It didn't seem to have done no harm, right? We can still write in block letters and type on our phones. History might be the next casualty, you know, with the same kind of arguments.
Well,
I can see that.
It's often focused on the wrong kind of people we don't like and we don't agree with. And so they deserve obscurity. I mean, there's many justifications for that kind of discriminatory thinking, which is really what it is.
Right. Yeah.
You know, if I don't like your race, I'm not going to study people of that racial heritage. You know, who's the loser? They're already dead and gone. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's better to learn from what they did and didn't do, and their mistakes as well.
Right.
And because they were faulty for reasons. It didn't just happen.
Right.
When things don't work, when people act in crazy ways and harm one another, there's a deeper force at work.
Right.
We've got to learn that lesson, and we've got to go looking for the connecting threads and root that out. That's our only hope.
Yeah, history is not a series of unrelated accidents. That's for sure. And it's a lot of times really it's taught that way.
Yeah.
And it's just not, it's not correct.
Yeah, it's really the legacy of a long-term subjugation of humanity.
Yeah.
And all the dark doings of history are the doings of the evil cabal, the dark spirits in the extraterrestrial alliance, who control governments, they control individuals through mind control.
Right. Yep.
And so we're never going to get out of this unless we see some clarity in the world we inhabit and what that really consists of, and see this bigger picture.
Right.
It's hard for us. We're like the ants among the skyscrapers, and there's so many things happening that we only learn about indirectly and imperfectly.
Yeah.
And our minds are clouded and all of that.
Right. And meanwhile, things are are progressing at a faster and faster rate, and the outcomes are becoming more predictable. So the time that we're given ostensibly to wake up is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So there is a sense of urgency, and it's not just based on paranoia; it's based on reality.
Well, and there's no quicker conversation stopper than bring up the subject of extraterrestrials over dinner at a gathering of some kind,
or in the elevator, or in the doctor's waiting room, anywhere. Yeah,
anywhere. And the contrast couldn't be greater in the people we talk to and the people in on the planet here now, in the living.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this time we were channeling one of our subjects in the light. And they were commenting that when they look down at the earth, they see that there are thousands of extraterrestrial missions flying every day, thousands of sorties where they go out to abduct people and manipulate them, disrupt them genetically, do breeding experiments, to use us like guinea pigs, mess up our DNA to see what will happen.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff, and do targeted killings and acts of sabotage and political intrigue and weather modification. They're watching this because they can. They have that perspective. They can see it.
Yeah.
And it's cloaked to human eye.
Right.
So it's invisible.
Right.
Only occasionally do we see an uncloaked craft.
Yeah. So the allegory or whatever is like, it's like looking down and you see all these puppets on strings, and none of the puppets can see that they're strings.
Yeah.
Not one of the puppets can see the strings. And it's got to be a really frustrating view for the light beings to see that. So maybe we can expose a couple strings here and see what Aldous has to say.
Well, we'll find out.
Okay.
This will be a good one, I think.
Okay.
Shall we proceed?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So I just will make a preliminary comment about channeling to describe briefly how I do this and why, because it relates to the problem we've been talking about here of incomplete information, corrupted information, faulty and misguiding information. And it starts from the reality that more than 90% of channelers have already been corrupted to talk to imposters. They're not channeling who they think they are. They haven't taken proper safeguards to be protected, because this dark alliance looks for people like that. They notice when an intuitive reach is launched, and they will always answer, always. And if the person really isn't ready to leap into the divine just yet, they'll likely encounter one of these lower level imposter beings first. And that's very seductive, because they think they've arrived, they've got success, and it goes from there. And then they'll get heavy corruption too, to keep them complacent. And that's why you hear an endless stream of encouragements and explanations and description of love and its importance, and it's all well and good. It's spiritually based, but it's sort of entry-level spirituality, and it's not helping with deep, serious problems. And these channelers aren't probing those because they've been corralled into thinking that's just human negativity, and don't even go there. And so they're focused on sweetness and light all the time. And that won't help you. You can die with a smile on your face that way, but you're going to die. And so let's get smart and use divine wisdom and get above the fray. And that's what I do with my channeling, by going to creator of all that is, to connect me to whoever the target is for the session, and to keep that conversation safe and uncorrupted and invisible to outside listening or interference of any kind.
Okay.
And that's what you need to do. So that's what I'll do here. And I will talk to Aldous Huxley, and when he's on board and the connection is in place, then he will announce his presence.
Okay.
This is Aldous Huxley speaking.
Thank you for joining us. For New York Magazine, Christopher Bonanos wrote, "The championship trophy for badly timed death, though, goes to a pair of British writers. Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, died the same day as C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia series. Unfortunately for both of their legacies, that day was November 22nd, 1963. Just as John Kennedy's motorcade passed the Texas School Book Depository, Huxley at least made it interesting. At his request, his wife shot him up with LSD a couple of hours before the end, and he tripped his way out of this world," unquote. So can you tell us about your death and the use of LSD for transition and the timing giving your grand company on that fateful day?
It was a fateful day indeed. It was a day when the whole world stopped in succession as news spread and people awakened to the news. My passing was unrelated, but it was also a milestone of sorts, as was the case for the other author you mentioned. C.S. Lewis was quite a titan in bringing divine wisdom through his writings. Your description earlier of the good parts of what people do as artists and writers coming from the divine is quite true. And it is because everything comes from the divine, other than your free will choice to be disconnected and to be devoid of knowledge and information if you choose. You are bestowed with a non-local consciousness that can reach out and learn anything. That at least is the potential. People have this to varying degrees. But it speaks to the ability that the ideal life experience is supernormal in that regard. That humans are not functioning the way they need to, nor indeed the way they were designed to function. You are divine extensions. You are divine in scope and in depth and in heritage and in the reality of being a part of the divine flow. It comes through you as a life force energy that supplies the working of your consciousness. What you do with it is under local control. So you indeed can contaminate things, corrupt things, neglect things, abuse things, or find ways to hone it, to sharpen and focus it, and cultivate it in a way that will not only help you to grow through learning and experience, but even transcend your beginnings into something truly magnificent, and for some, not only noteworthy, but works of greatness. each person has within them the awareness of a divine miracle unfolding. That is what each human life represents. It is a miracle of existence. The fact that many lives seem mundane to you is more a function of your perspective than the reality that it represents. You are far grander than you know. My yearnings were an inner awareness. There was something beyond the self. And I had quite strong yearnings to find out more about this and to connect with it in whatever way I could. And so I dabbled in the metaphysical, wanting not just to learn as an intellectual exercise, but to be, knowing my life was incomplete. This is a gift. Most people are complacent. They may be dissatisfied with their lives to some extent, but the dissatisfaction is rarely in seeing a disparity between their mode of existence and something lofty, but rather having the annoyances of everyday concerns, inconveniences, and limitations financially for the most part, and to some extent being entrapped by life circumstances, family ties, physical liabilities and limitations, and so on. That was the basis of my turning to psychedelic substances. It was the yearning for spiritual connection. And all the time, what I was yearning for and missing was being at one with Creator, in Creator's presence, and communicating directly. This is what you do when you are not here. It is available to all. And you are used to that. And you will miss it when it is denied you through a human incarnation into an incomplete and malfunctioning vessel as represented by the human body. The psychedelics that I enjoyed gave me a sense of the transcendental. They tickle that part that sees wider horizons and has a depth of feeling about the opening up of new ways of being, new ways of seeing, and new ways of feeling. That enhancement of the senses, so that food tastes far better. Sex is more delightful. And one's thoughts are magnified in significance. Are in some ways a compensation to narrow that gap between the ordinary human experiencing of conscious awareness and the lofty realm one comes from, where the capability of the mind is far, far vaster than anything a human can experience. unfortunately, the awarenesses promoted and enhanced by psychedelic drugs are very much akin to simply touching a nerve that makes one feel good, being that there is nothing truly much more profound than a stimulus response triggered artificially. That's what the chemical substances do. And this is why you will not see great works of literature nor great works of art existing and promoted as products of psychedelic drug experiences. Their lofty nature experienced during the session do not carry over into a subsequent rendering of what came forth, because it will be absent that extra stimulation of the feel-good mechanisms of the body. But that is not the same thing as those ideas having important meaning and content and an innate worth and value as wisdom of some kind, a loftier and deeper understanding of something. There can be a facilitation of creativity. That is not what we are saying, but it will still be constrained, and it will still be colored greatly by the false substitute of that feel-good chemistry layered in with any new heightened awareness and the glimmer of something of value and practical meaning that might be discerned under such circumstances. The mind is the mind, and it will not stop, but will keep going. So a thought is a thought, whether drug facilitated or enhanced or not. But we would argue that any ideas occurring during such circumstances can occur without the drug support just as readily, and likely will be more readily experienced and more likely to be appreciated and acted on than as part of a drug-induced euphoria during which everything feels important and lofty, but much will truly not be. It is the feelings alone that make it seem so. It is somewhat like a person luxuriating in a hot bath after finding a safe haven from the freezing cold of winter and luxuriating. But what they do and think will not be magnified greatly. It will shift their perspective to focus on the delights at hand. But that does not have an inherent lofty purpose or consequence. It is simply recounting the life experience that is unfolding and will have limited value to others. those thoughts in retrospect and in reverie by the experiencer will help to trigger a summoning of some of the feelings that were taking place. So to the experiencer, it will continue to be a cherished event, but will not translate well and be useful. So I would say that the idea of commencing with one's transition while under the influence of any chemical substances, aside from pain relief, is a bad idea. There is a danger in exaggerating unpleasantness, and particularly so when one is contemplating one's demise. In addition to which, there must be the cultivation of an inner vibration that will be compatible with a divine outreach. There can be a facilitation through chemical substances of a spiritual impulse. That is what I was striving for. So my mind and heart were in the right place, even though I was suffering physically. It gave me something to focus on that was better than focusing on my physical plight. We are only saying that it is something we would not prescribe for everyone. Too many people are suffering and in a disheveled state at the time of their transition. And adding a drug into the mix will be a risky undertaking in those circumstances. It might well precipitate a kind of delusional state that will be an impediment to a successful transition even. Once the consciousness leaves the body, there can be clarity because it will be altered and distorted by the physicality of living within that container and using the brain in particular as the readout of what consciousness is doing and pondering. But there is a carryover of intention, and that is where things can continue to be harmful if that intention is a mixed one and has within it doubts and a fear-based negativity.
Okay, thank you. Your eyesight issues seem to direct your life's course and also seem as to not prevent you from significant accomplishments. You contracted the eye disease keratitis punctata in 1911, and you were practically blind for 2 to 3 years. You volunteered for the British Army in January of 1916, the Great War. However, you were rejected on health grounds being half-blind in one eye. Your eyesight later partly recovered, and then later still, your eyesight improved again dramatically with the Bates method and the extreme and pure natural lighting of the southwestern American desert. Was your eyesight problems a karmic issue? Were you also healed in some way beyond what was claimed?
We like these questions very, very much because the whole arena of healthcare is woefully misguided in being blind to the true origin of illness. It is almost always karmic. That is not to say a physical consequence is not playing out in the body that is traceable biochemically, often genetically, and certainly physiologically in aberrant function of cells and tissues, and therefore quite physical and concrete, identifiable, demonstrable, and amenable to study, and also some degree of modification through physical means in the way of drugs and various types of energetic interventions. But that disarray and misalignment that becomes diagnosable does have a deeper origin. And that is the piece that is always missing from the scientific inquiry of illness. What caused the genetic alteration? What caused the state of physiologic dysregulation to be chronically functioning with the wrong set points, or the inadequate production of an important mediator of function, or some early interference so the turnover of cells is impaired? And cellular senescence does not lead to prompt replacement. There are many ways that disease manifests, but all are traceable back to a karmic beginning. My history was one in other lifetimes where my use of vision presented an opportunity for me to save others in great danger, but would have risked myself. And I failed to act. As a consequence, the law of karma found a way to arrange the makeup of my being in a fashion that impaired my vision. And then it became a personal liability, harming me and potentially preventing achieving a successful lifetime, other than one of living in disability and marking time until my eventual passing, living in frustration and feeling incompetent, inadequate, and a failure. This was, in a sense, a just repayment for failing to prevent the longevity of others and their comfort and safety. The law of karma is very precise in its workings, not always meting out a direct and organ-specific complementary liability in proportion to some event of the past, but looking at the overall degree of difficulty imposed and its consequences as a means of repaying a debt to someone or in effect, an offense to the balance of the universe by taking something away from the self. And that energy goes to someone for their restoration. This is largely out of view, and humans are unaware. This goes on all the time. It is the major source of what happens in life on all levels. It governs how quickly you learn, how quickly you become independent and capable as an adult, whether you will find a successful outlet in life to express your soul's makeup and yearnings, whether you will make a mark, whether your life will count in a significant way for anyone beyond yourself. You are not unimportant. You are your first obligation, in fact. But the highest calling is to be of service to others. And for that, one needs to be intact. You need to be hale and hearty, and if possible, financially secure in today's world. That brings lots of freedom and many options you can use in service to humanity in a larger way, if you are so inclined. In a sense, having an impairment reduces all such capabilities. So it is a double penalty. Not only will you suffer from being denied things, your karmic future destiny will be impaired as well, because you are losing the moment and the current life and what it might be doing to propel you forward and plant the seeds for future lives that will build on the current one to further your learning and growth and extend your reach and raise you up in the expression of your soul and its growth. When you are hobbled by illness, you will be marking time. It is like serving a sentence and cannot be avoided except through divine grace. So it is a necessity of existence that one must pay the piper, so to speak. Everything you do is important. It all matters. And karma will always find a way to restore balance to what you throw out of alignment personally or in affecting others. And it will come at your expense, the restitution and the repayment of what is needed to restore that balance. It is a learning exercise. And it is true for all human beings. No one is pristine. No one is perfect. All have karmic damage and karmic missteps and karmic penalties that must be addressed in some way. This is one of the great advantages of having a robust divine partnership, because you can get divine help in rebalancing your karmic lessons to have this take place in a more artful fashion with less personal suffering if you have divine assistance. If you do it entirely on your own in a state of ignorance and a lack of capability to understand what it means to be in divine alignment and to seek that state of being, you will be greatly at a disadvantage in finding an effective means to escape a quandary brought to you courtesy of the law of karma, where you flounder in a state of suffering and impairment. This is probably the number one lesson humans need to learn and understand. The object lesson is less in the healing of those who suffer than in the awareness that all will suffer from what they do if they fail to make wise choices in life in utilizing their energies. Few would take the actions they do if they realized that in a future life they might die young of cancer or diabetes complications or heart disease as a consequence for repaying the negativity they have introduced into the world in some way or another through their negligence, unawareness of consequences, or a selfish impulse to serve oneself and cause harm to others. There are degrees of severity in transgressions of this kind, but the punishments will often be amplified greatly, because in the consequence of having to rebalance, there will be a wounding of the self. So this will result in a compounding of the damage. A perpetrator always repays much more than the energetics of the immediate consequences of their transgressions. And that is because it spreads from their victim to others who they let down, who they are not there for, because they're preoccupied with the difficulty you may have started in their life for them. And all of that additional pain and suffering going through a series of interactions spreading outward will be on record, and that energy is what will be coming around to you in the future for a day of reckoning. It might be a quite painful one. This speaks to the broader issue of the day, which we will be touching on as we go along here. You are not the only ones trapped by the law of karma and its consequences. Those inspiring evil within you have much greater karmic harm coming their way and need rescuing. The need here extends far beyond the human family. In a sense, you are in a larger family grouping. You are corrupted by dark spirits with all kinds of faulty notions, influencing humans, corrupting them, encouraging bad behavior, selfishness, neglect of others, and the self, turning people into predators. Their karmic burdens are enormous. But all of the corrupted ones who then prey on others will be next in line for a karmic payday of tremendous magnitude. Only you can save them because they are part of your sphere of influence. We cannot save them from themselves because they will not ask for our help. They cannot. They are too far gone. They need a divine spokesperson from the human cohort to be their advocate, their champion, their savior.
Okay, thank
my
you.
My healing of my eyesight is a small example of this karmic interplay that has taken place all through human history. It has its origin in the corruptors. That is where the negativity ultimately comes from. But it spreads and grows through each generation. It is handed down from parents to the young, and by the young to their peers. The institutions of society similarly corrupted to teach the wrong lessons, to support the wrong things, and to discourage ingenuity, expression of divine impulses, and logical thinking. All illness is a symptom of this larger drama that is unfolding.
Okay, thank you. Neil Postman, author and social critic, wrote, "Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information, and Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance," unquote. Sometimes it seems both are somehow true. What is your view now that you are a light being again?